Morning, everyone. We're just going to wait a little minute or so whilst everyone starts to join the webinar. Wait a couple more seconds whilst the more people come in. Okay, what I'll do is I'll start now. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the final webinar, our final webinar of 2025, if you believe it. We're going to be focusing on what we think some key trends are going to be in 2026. I'm Vicky Davis. I'm the marketing manager for CalcuRisk, and I'll be doing the moderating today. We've got several speakers this morning looking at different subjects. So it's going to start with Sandy and then on risk management trends and ending with Jerry talking about cybersecurity trends. And before we start, I'll do a bit of housekeeping. All slides are going to be sent out after the webinar and a recording will be available on our YouTube channel. If you feel free to ask questions as we go along the way in the Q&A box, probably at the bottom of your screen. If you want to direct any question to any member of the panel specifically, please include their name in the question. And then I will go through them at the end of the session. So in the meantime, enjoy the webinar. Thanks very much for joining us. And I will pass over to Sandy.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all again at this time of the year. Busy time for everyone, but so we appreciate your attendance. Over the next 3 slides, I will be looking, I suppose, towards 2026. I suppose, want to communicate what I see as the kind of 3 general trends in risk management that it's become apparent and just clear to those working in risk management at the moment. For the first one, I think the key one is being outcomes focused. It's just a trend that's very clear in the industry at the moment, and we'll have a look at that in a moment. I will then look at being less static, more proactive, and the third topic today will be on adding value through planning. So I suppose on the outcomes focus piece, historically, the sole focus of control effectiveness, which a lot of our risk management activity tends to center on, was very much concerned with compliance with policies, plans, procedures, all those good things that we have to have in place. But the regulators have changed from simply focusing on being directive, should we say, about how things should be done, to also assessing whether our consumers of our products and services across all the industries and organizations that are logged on today, whether your consumers are achieving good outcomes as a result of their interaction and the result of the output, if you like, of these policies and procedures. And regulators definitely seem to be trying to be less complex in prescribing how businesses should behave, and are very much focusing on the outcome of the behaviors themselves. So they're trying to ensure that consumers achieve the most positive outcomes for their engagement with your businesses through availing of all of your products and services. So that has been a fairly significant shift in focus, I think, in recent years. And it is certainly becoming clearer and clearer as time goes on. So what we're not saying is that the full suite of policies and plans and procedures is now irrelevant. These are obviously still needed, but businesses also need to be monitoring the outcomes of that in order to be able to fully assess how effective your controls, your risk mitigation controls are. And to monitor those outcomes, you will need to know what the early indicators of deterioration of those outcomes might be. So these are, as we use the term in risk management, your key risk indicators. The more obvious ones are things like monitoring complaints. And that is useful because it does help you to keep an eye on whether the service is deteriorating in some way. And it's not just about those formal complaints. It can also be about the minor whinges and signs of discontent that you might be seeing or hearing, or your frontline staff might be seeing or hearing. They're not quite complaints, but they will give you an indication of things that are maybe not going as well as you would like, or that your consumers are not getting the full benefit that you would like them to receive. You also have things, the more obvious ones, like your incidents and near misses. So clear things like service disruptions, you're always keeping an eye on those. But then things such as your internal audit findings, your external audit findings, any independent assessments that you might have being conducted around the services and products that you offer. All of these are signs that the desired outcomes might not be quite right. Some will conduct surveys and so on, but it's very much just about keeping an eye on what your consumers are actually seeing and experiencing. And for me, that has been, I suppose, one of the biggest changes we've seen in recent years in terms of the change to the an ongoing trend, shall we say. So the next slide that I'm going to look at today is on being less static and more outcomes, so more proactive in terms of how you approach risk. In that sense, it is clear that, historically, risk management has always was very much focused on developing your risk register, having a lot of information that was relatively static in the past. As risk management embeddedness matures, it is definitely more now about responding more quickly, about being proactive in your approach to risk management. The risk universe itself for your individual businesses is changing all the time. It is very specific to your business and therefore needs to be monitored for yourselves. And this can include all sorts of different changes, whether it's new products and services, whether it's changes to your organizational structure that might be for various reasons, the most obvious one being any changes to your own business model. But it can be maybe as a result of transfers of engagements, it could be mergers, it could be as simple as new staff and volunteers joining the business and culture changing. And that can happen almost below the radar. So it is well worth keeping an eye on. You also have planned succession planning or planned succession, whereby for some time that changes are going to have to be built in for various reasons. And it is about planning for that from a very risk managed perspective. It's absolutely vital to keep an eye on the horizon, basically on a continuous basis. You have to be looking out for what's coming next. It is important to do that so you can figure out how to prioritize those upstream challenges. The whole point really is to be as ready as possible, even if that does mean having to prepare for multiple potential scenarios, any one of which may or may not materialize. But being proactive means trying to anticipate what those changes might be and planning for them. Proactive risk assessments addressing those potential problems can be things like your negative economic indicators if you're starting to see things deteriorating more broadly, looking at what that might mean for your business. And I suppose the key thing to remember is you can always revert back if the risk does not materialize. So it's about, bringing it up onto the agenda for your business, keeping an eye on it. If it's something that might be of concern to you, just, bring it higher on the agenda for a while. If it doesn't materialize, you can always revert back to where you were at the beginning. But I would say, in relation to actual findings then, rather than maybe horizon scanning, be prompt in responding to any audit findings, to any review, if you have independent assessments, anything like that is giving you an indication of where things need to be corrected or adjusted. Be prompt in that response. And it's very important to track ownership and monitor those tasks to completion. It's not good enough simply to know what they are. You have to now be very clear in how you're addressing them. And it may not be you individually, but as a team, as a business, how those shortcomings are addressed. So my third slide is on adding value through planning. And for me, I suppose this is one area that I've been quite passionate about, because I think it's very much a reflection of the maturity of an organization in terms of its risk management journey. Everybody's focus needs to be on how to achieve the organization's strategic objectives in a risk managed way. risk management officers really need to be constructive in their approach rather than obstructive or to be seen as a bottleneck in the channel of moving towards those strategic goals. I do think risk management officers should be focusing on how to assist the organization to achieve them through early risk identification, along with, at the same time, identifying a path to appropriate risk mitigation. It's always important to remember that there is a balance between appropriate risk-taking and inappropriate risk-taking. It's very rarely a no-risk approach. That's not feasible. But timing is everything. Early engagement by the risk management function and timely response with reports, guidance, risk mitigation plans, and so on will be critical to get buy-in from all the stakeholders, whether that's your own management team, your board, third parties, regulators, all of those stakeholders in your business. It's important to remember that at the same time, risk management is simply one source of management information amongst others. But when considering all those relevant functions, it helps, for each to contribute to making a fully risk-based informed decision. The key from a risk management perspective, speaking slightly biased, I will admit, is that I do believe the risk management perspective is valuable as it is a more comprehensive, usually objective, wider view of each proposal that your business is considering. And that can be very helpful during the planning process to achieve those good outcomes that we spoke about on an earlier slide. And those are good outcomes both for your business and your consumers. And that's ultimately what good risk management is all about. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what maybe the key themes I see happening in the risk management area in 2026. I'm going to hand over now to Paul. And Paul O'Brien will speak to you about the ESG Outlook for 2026.
Great, thank you, Sandy. Thanks, Vicky. Well, good morning, and delighted to be here this morning. Relatively short sections, short segments. So, for those of you who are familiar with me on Lunch and Learns and other webinars, you'll know that doing this in 8 minutes as a section is going to be difficult. However, I've got 4 slides, and the first one I'm looking at is the outcome of the COP30. So the Conference of the Parties in Brazil. And I've just posed it here as a set of questions. And the first one is, was it a confusion of conflicts? And with all of these large meetings with such complex and diverse agendas, there's always a confusion of conflicts. And the other question posed here is, was it like Hamlet without the prince, without the Americans, the large voice of the principal funder that has withdrawn from the whole process, or appears to have withdrawn at some level from the whole process. But the truth is that the conference went on and it worked. And while the specific American presence wasn't there, nonetheless, the influence and the people who were reacting to that influence were there. And the American effort was talked about. And some of the American effort, particularly in technology, is actually quite significant and incredibly progressive. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the subsequent 3 slides. Were there tangible outcomes? Yes, there were. Fiona's going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that happened in the regulatory environment. And some of the stuff that happened around it. One of the things was the Deforestation Act out of the EU. It was amended, that amendment, that whole process was talked about down there. Does it matter anymore? Yes, it does, particularly for the smaller countries around the world and for those with, I suppose, the less hopeful agendas, those who are likely to be most impacted by the effect of climate change. And it's always good to listen to those voices. Because they're probably the most urgent, and the need for that ESG framework, they articulate it and they bring it to those meetings. It's good to keep hearing it. Are the message increasingly depressing? Yes and no. At certain levels, yes. and particularly when you look at the shorter time frame. But when you look at the longer time frame, some of the conversations that went on at it are far more optimistic. And I'm always an optimist. So was there any good news from it? Yes, there was. Is it worth continuing with these meetings? Absolutely, yes, it is. And I think that by COP40, the agenda will have changed completely, and the conversation will be about the time frame about implementing major solutions to resolve the problem. So I'm going to move on to the technologies, three technologies that I see, and not just I, but that are emerging technologies that are significant in terms of their contribution to the solution here. So the first one I'm looking at is direct air capture. So basically what this is, it takes large volumes of air, process them through a chemical process, and takes the carbon dioxide out. It then goes through it comes out as a mixture. It goes through a separation process. The carbon dioxide is taken off. The media that is used to cause the reaction in the first place is recycled, and the carbon dioxide is then held at pressure as a liquid. Once the separation happens, what goes on next is you move on to the next phase, and the carbon dioxide is basically pumped into the ground. But in terms of the status of what's happening around the world, there are facilities now operational extracting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere at a rate of billions of tons. And this is it's gaining momentum. There are 120 facilities either active or in planning. And the business model is viable because basically once the extraction is done and the sequestration process has been completed, the the captured carbon is available for sale. So basically as offsets. So the business model works and the investment is then moving into that business model for organizations that are going to find it difficult. For example, the aviation sector I often refer to, they can now buy carbon credits from facilities like these. And so it's expanding. It's a viable business model, which is important because that means investment will be made into it. It is potentially globally deployable. Right now, it's associated with the oil industry. So somewhere near oil fields is where you're seeing the current deployment, but there's nothing to stop it with potential. So if we move on to the second one, which is sequestration. So basically what this is you're taking the carbon dioxide as a gas, putting it under incredibly high pressure and pumping it deep into the earth. And these are usually associated with the DAC plants, but pushing this carbon dioxide gas as a liquid back into the place it came from, and it will be held. It holds under pressure naturally, and basically it is out of the atmosphere. So it again part of the DAC process, the whole process, the sequestration. We think about sequestration generally as growing trees, but the reality is this is accelerated sequestration. That is it basically reducing the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and putting it back into where it came from. Again, financially viable as a result of the DAC process. And the third one that I want to talk about is the it's called BESS. So basically what you're looking at is grid batteries. So utility scale batteries that are charged with surplus renewable energy, particularly associated with wind farms and solar farms. And these are now being deployed worldwide. So we begin to look at a market for these batteries, and the growth projections in them has taken it over $100 billion in sales for the people who are producing these things and for the deployment. So most of the large utilities in the world are now beginning to take this technology very seriously. What it does is and there are a number of advantages. I've put a couple of useful links in here that it's worth looking at what the advantages of these things are. First of all, they're instant on. So even as you go around the country, you'll see these containers appearing around the place with the utilities. They're putting these inside the containers of these batteries. Some of them are lithium ion, some of them are iron, some of them, the technologies vary and they're multiple, which means there's competition between the technologies for the production. Some of the production costs are dropping rapidly, but these particular battery sets associated, for example, they're like uninterruptible power supplies on large scale. So your grid has effectively batteries sitting there that are uninterruptible power supplies that will come on immediately. There's a fault. They're instantly available. So the outages that happened in Spain and Portugal earlier this year, if they had even a small number of these BESS sets, would not have happened because when the solar farms failed, there was nothing to replace them available quickly. With these batteries, that availability and that issue disappears. So it's emerging technology. There is more emerging technology, but these three in particular, in my view, will eventually be a very large part of the solution to the climate action program. And by COP40, I think an awful lot of the world will be talking about potentially reversing the climate trend past 2050. So, always an optimist. I hope you have a wonderful Christmas and thank you very much for your interest in these webinars through 2025. Over to Fiona.
Thanks, Paul. Hello, everyone. As Sandy and Paul both pointed out, 8 minutes is an awfully short time to deliver so much information. So I'm literally going to do a whistle-stop tour around the world in relation to data protection trends I expect in 2026, or that have been, signposted quite well. And I'll begin here in Ireland. Now, if there's anything that you want more detail on, we will be sharing links in the final slide when we share them, or you can ask questions at the end. But bear in mind, there's an awful lot of background information to these slides. So starting in Ireland, we're starting with data protection supervision, I guess, and just taking Ireland as the model because it's fair to say that all of the EU data protection authorities have had their work cut out for them since the GDPR was officially adopted 10 years ago now, almost in 2016. And 10 years on, 2026 is shaping up to be a year of even greater responsibilities for our own data protection authority and data protection authorities around the bloc. So the Irish Data Protection Commission is in the unenviable position of supervising some of the world's biggest data processing tech companies. And it will go into 2026 with a 3-commissioner model following the appointment of Niamh Sweeney this last October. They've been given a 10% increase in funding in the budget. One would suggest that that's probably not enough, and making its funding almost 32.3 million, but it's granted an additional 3 million to fund staffing increases because its workload is ramping up due to EU digital legislation such as the Data Markets Act, the Data Act, the Digital Services Act, but also data protection supervision for aspects of other legislation such as the AI Act. It will become the market surveillance for high-risk AI systems in 2026. It will oversee the implementation of Articles 18 and 19 of the Political Advertising Regulation, as well as monitoring and enforcing the application of the Platform Workers Directive, Articles 7 to 11, for data protection matters. So moving on, across the European Union, just as our own Data Protection Commission is gearing up for a busy year, so are the others. Recognizing data as a key enabler of competitiveness in the digital economy, the EU is attempting to balance individuals' rights with lowering the cost of compliance for business while stimulating competitiveness in the region. So 2026 will see continuing introductions of new initiatives that will keep us on our toes as we monitor developments throughout 2026. In the realm of data protection, the Commission has presented its digital package last month. It's a hefty behemoth of a package. It included omnibus proposals, one of which is focused on simplifying data protection and privacy legislation, and another on AI Act amendments. The hope is that the proposed amendments will enter into force early 2027, so expect a lot of activity around this next year. But in terms of compliance with GDPR and e-privacy, 2026 is looking like it will be business as usual. So the EU is also actively preparing for the quantum threat, not only to personal data, but to systems and data across the board. But in relation to data protection, it has mandated a coordinated transition to post-quantum cryptography. And that was mandated in its 2020-24 roadmap. And it has urged member states to develop national post-quantum cryptography plans by the late 2026 to secure critical systems. Personal data and digital infrastructure focus on early adoption, inventorying cryptographic assets, and integrating PQC into public sectors to ensure that privacy and data sovereignty is strengthened against future quantum attacks. Member states are also urged to begin the transition to post-quantum cryptography by the end of 2026, and they're encouraged to transition critical infrastructure protection to PQC as soon as possible, but no later than the end of 2020, so there's a longer timeline there. In the United Kingdom, our nearest neighbour, no longer in the EU, they were granted data adequacy since the UK GDPR was deemed to be adequate, I guess, in place of the EU GDPR, thus allowing personal data to flow freely between the jurisdictions. So these decisions are time limited. Originally, it was 4 years, and that's now due to expire in December 2025. So this month, the end of the month. The European Data Protection Board has proposed, its opinion is that it should be offered a 6-year term next, but there are a couple of things that are causing concern for the EU Data Protection Board. That's the influence of the Secretary of State for Innovation and Technology. They have retained the ability to add new data protection laws or proposals. For instance, from January 2026, the UK charities are getting a new soft opt-in for electronic marketing and emails for charitable purposes, which will allow them to contact people who showed interest or offered support, provided they were given a clear opt-out. And that's, reforms to the EU data protection laws could influence future UK secondary legislation. So that's a little bit of a worry. In the US, following California's lead, numerous states have now enacted their own consumer data privacy laws with differing positions on consumer rights, procure periods for violations, and consent models, for instance, opt-in versus opt-out. So that landscape continues to diverge. So while earlier laws were similar, more recently, for example, in Maryland with its data minimization provisions, this illustrates how states are increasingly experimenting with distinct regulatory approaches. So in the US, if you've got a presence in the US, you can't rely on a one-size-fits-all compliance model, unfortunately, and you must tailor your practices to each state's specific requirements. Looking quickly at Asia Pacific, so India's digital personal data protection implementation will continue in 2026, with the next operational date set for November the 13th. and finally enacted in May 2027. And Vietnam then, their new personal data protection law will officially take effect on the 1st of January 2026. So both of these establishing comprehensive legal frameworks for data privacy and for, that impacts both local and international businesses who are handling personal data in the region. Middle East and Africa, quickly, in 2026, the landscape across that region will be characterized by ongoing implementation and enforcement of new localized regulations with several key compliance deadlines and major events scheduled. So, for instance, Kuwait will, for Kuwait, 2026 will be its first complete year with a fully effective personal data protection law. So jurisdictions across every continent are enacting comprehensive frameworks, each with distinct requirements and penalties, and that's causing all sorts of headaches for compliance teams everywhere. So my final slide is just looking at how we could reduce our data breach risk in 2026. So the first point there is to reassess data processing activities jurisdictionally, because things are changing all the time, and more jurisdictions are legislating for stronger data protection and privacy rules. So, for instance, do you know what data processing activities are being carried out and in what jurisdiction? Does your data protection framework reflect that? If you're trying to manage diverse protection, data protection rules, a more effective approach might be to operate to the highest standard across the board. But these are decisions that you're going to have to make. The second one there is to revisit your technical and operational measures. I know now Jerry's going to talk about cybersecurity, but this is from a data protection viewpoint. So the latest data breach statistics show that on average, breaches are becoming more expensive to fix. So now it's not just about the data breach anymore, but it's about fixing the, rectifying the situation. But at the same time, the scale of cybercrime continues to skyrocket. So if we look at some recent breaches, such as Marks and Spencer's and Vodafone Germany, these breaches were both affected through human error. So staff in both of these organizations were fooled by the hackers, and resulting in enormous cost to the company and, red faces all around. So revisit your technical and operational measures, particularly as it goes to your third parties, because they are part of your organization in terms of data protection and privacy law. So number 3, strengthen your AI governance. AI, needless to say, is the elephant in the room. I didn't really mention it as I came through these slides. It's everywhere. So your AI governance is going to take a lot of your time, or should at least take a lot of your time in the coming months and years. Do you know what your risk appetite for AI is in your organization? Do you understand the use of shadow AI among your colleagues and staff members? Carry out an AI audit. What's being used, and where, and why, and what's going through it, and who owns the outcomes? These are all questions that are very important to know the answers to. Understand how AI is being utilized by your third-party service providers. So include AI-related questions in your third-party due diligence. Establish an AI policy, what's acceptable, what's not. Are you on this, will you fully ban it? Are you going to give every employee autonomy on what they use? Are you going to land in the middle with controlled usage that's set out in policy? And why AI? Is AI the answer? So what's the problem we're trying to fix? Have we found a lovely shiny AI, a piece of AI, and we want to use it, so we're trying to find a problem to fix? Or do we actually have a problem that we need to apply artificial intelligence to? And before there, reinforce your cross-functional cooperation internally. Sandy spoke about it upfront. More and more, it's so important to get everybody in the room when we're managing risk, particularly cross-functional risk, such as data protection. So everybody from engineering to finance to, marketing to the C-suite needs to have a voice and be communicating with each other in relation to your data protection risk. And last and not least, employee training and awareness constantly, and no change in 2025. The leading cause of data breaches by far are human factors. Stolen and weak credentials, being caught out by phishing. Studies show that over 68% of data breaches involve human error. Technical flaws, again, like unpatched vulnerabilities, but Jerry will talk more about that. So those are my 5 top tips for reducing data breach in 2026. And with that, I will hand over to Chris, I think.
Perfect. Thanks, Fiona. I'm going to spend the next 5 or so minutes probably talking about why third-party risk management matters, and probably a bit obvious to everyone on the call as to why it matters. So I imagine it's not going to be new to a lot of you, but it's more just some of the trends that we're seeing as we head into 2026, as organizations probably mature their approach to third-party risk management and shift away from more of a tick box exercise to actually more of a life cycle exercise as well. So on the right-hand side, I just popped in some snippets from headlines basically of where things go wrong, how quickly it can make the press. And look, things do always go wrong. So just a quick recap on basically why it matters. And I suppose we could probably do a whole presentation on why this matters, but really quick recap: good governance demands it, basically. Whether you're a not-for-profit or regulated financial institution, there's a fairly good chance, and I think Sandy alluded to at the beginning, that you're concerned with succession planning. We're trying to get non-exec directors, be they volunteer or paid, to come onto the organization's board or a committee. The reality is that a lot of people, or a lot of those non-exec directors, will be doing their own due diligence on the company to make sure that the company has a robust process for around this too. Particularly when you tie it back to the personal responsibility regimes that we're starting to see across the world. And I think one of the headlines on the right-hand side here is the Bank of England or the PRA fining a TSB executive after their outage or their issue back in 2018. That was actually a personal fine and sanction as well. So we're starting to see the rise of that, as well as just legislation and regulation, NIST, NIS2, the Digital Operation Resilience Act, and local guidelines as well around the importance of that too. The next point that I just included here is reputation, and probably there's a financial impact as well, or Fiona mentioned it too, of the cost of rectifying some of these breaches as well. I had a look at Marks and Spencer's when we were doing the research for this, and I think they wiped £700 million off the value of the business and lost out on £300 million of online sales as part of their third-party failure. And that was social engineering, I think, with an IT help desk they had outsourced, which feels fairly non-technical, if that makes sense. It's like we all focus on the technical stuff, and then something as simple as that could catch us out. So don't underestimate the reputation piece, and when something does go wrong, how quickly it can make social media and the press and things like that. The positive of getting it right, though, is that it enables faster, safer growth. So I was talking to someone recently, and they were alluding to the fact that it's not just easier if we just don't use third parties. We reduce our third party footprint, reduce the need to have all that oversight and scope and things like that as well. But the reality is, if you're scaling, you want to leverage service providers that are offering something that is allowing you scale your organization in a fast and safe manner. And then, as alluded to as well, things do go wrong. And the big thing here, when you get third-party risk management right, is that you have greater resilience when it does go wrong. You know what to do. It's not panic mode when you're thinking, where's that disaster recovery plan? Or have we tested the business continuity plan? Or who do we even ring when something goes wrong? The reality is, if you have a robust approach to this, when things do go wrong, you should bounce back that bit quicker and ultimately have less financial loss, less reputation damage, and everything else as well. So, which kind of brings us on to the next slide around starting to see it as more of a complete life cycle of the third party. So, I think organizations over the years have done really well in having these 2 phases done correctly in the pre-contract and contractual. So, in pre-contract, we're thinking of, does the supplier actually satisfy the service or the product that we're looking for? So functionality wise, or service level agreement, does that actually work? And then I think a lot of organizations over the last kind of 3 to 5 years have fallen into the trap of, we give the contract over to legal or compliance They give it a review. It seems to satisfy all our standard terms and conditions, and we tick the box and we move on. But unfortunately, it's the next two phases where a lot of organizations get caught out when things do go wrong. And what we're seeing as we move into 2026 is more of a shift towards ongoing monitoring. So where critical third-party providers are starting to get quarterly or 6 monthly due diligence questionnaires from their customers. So it could be something as simple as just a reattestation to some of the controls that you already did as part of your initial onboarding, verifying you haven't had any breaches, changes senior management team, and things like that. And then the last piece then as well as around the exit. As counterintuitive as I might think of at the pre-contract phase, I would actually start thinking about exit planning of if something does go wrong or for some reason we need to exit this provider, how do we get all our data back? Is there suitable third parties that we could move to if something did go wrong? If that provider went bankrupt, had a large outage for some reason, do we know who else we could go to? So I said, yeah, the last 3 to 5 years, I feel organizations have got the first 2 points really well. But as we move into 26, the next two bullet points are becoming equally, or if not more important than the first two bullet points. And I'm very conscious of time and not trying to eat into Jerry's time as well. So I just literally have one more slide on that piece where I mentioned around the third party life cycle or the management of the third party almost stopping it when it got to the contract stage. Even ourselves internally, we've seen due diligence questionnaires range in size, and it feels like they're getting more and more comprehensive over the last 12 months. And certainly going forward, they're not going to stop in terms of that comprehensive nature. So we get quizzed all the time on things like the ownership, the management team, the registration. So having a think of, do you really know the organization that you're doing business with? Or is it just a glossy website and maybe you don't know where the data is going to be or who actually owns the business? And that brings us on to the next few pillars then as well around information security and data protection. So Fiona mentioned all the pitfalls and traps around data protection, particularly that ongoing regulatory landscape moving. You might think you're doing business with a firm in Ireland or the UK or within the EU, but where is the data actually going? Is it going further out, further field into fourth parties? From the CIA perspective, how do you test for the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your information as you choose that third party? And then what does the breach response look like? How quickly do you get notified? Where do you fall in line in their own breach response plans and things like that as well? And then we move on then into the next piece then around operation resilience and business continuity. So as mentioned, things do go wrong. That's somewhat normal. But how do we recover from that? Have we got plans? Are the plans tested or are they just shelfware? Do they just sit there and they pass the initial ongoing due diligence and everything? Or sorry, the initial due diligence, but there has been no evidence of testing. Any fourth parties we should be aware of. So is your third party further outsourcing the service and you're losing control or visibility or oversight of that as well? And then what's the organization's track record like? Have they had any large breaches in the last 12 months? Are they willing to let you chat to people who already avail of their service and things like that as well? And the last piece then is really looking at the legals and financials, which a lot of organizations have already done. So in terms of accounts, if it's a startup, are they well funded? Have they got a big enough runway such that you're happy that they can serve the contract? And then kind of somewhat alluding to the track record piece then as well around litigation. Is there any ongoing litigation around them? So initially where we've seen the due diligence questionnaire is focusing on the red tape, if you like, of a contract. Now we're starting to see them around the whole supply chain or value chain of that third party of, right, if I'm contracting you, where is it going to? And I want full, complete visibility of that whole supply chain. So definitely going forward into 2026, we're seeing those DDQs getting more invasive and intrusive, but in a positive way. And I'm going to stop talking there because I'm conscious of time and we have to get it over to Jerry as well. So thanks again, everyone, for your engagement throughout the year and over to Jerry to kind of close it out, I think.
Thank you, Chris. And good morning. I got 5 minutes? No, I got 3 minutes. Going to cover it in three headings: cybersecurity trends. I could say the attacks are going to get worse, and your defense has got to get better, and that's the message. Let me have a look. So first of all, agentic AI. For years, people talked about generative AI. So what's agentic AI? Just think of it as lots of agents, each an individual, like smaller brain that are orchestrated into one big brain. So it's worse basically. But yes, you'll have agentic AI in attack, and the bad guys will be using AI to first of all find out more quickly where your weaknesses are. That's the automated reconnaissance. To create those personalized emails. Years ago we used to say that you'd recognize an email by the language, by the poor English and whatnot. Those days are gone. These emails, the social engineering, and this is used in over 90% of attacks. And the human is still the weakest link, but they're more convincing. And they've even researched, and the AI has done the research on you, and the email is couched in terms that you'll be familiar with. So you're more easily fooled. The AI, the bad guys, again, using AI to create malware and create malware that can evade detection because they know, the AI knows how malware is detected. So they've upped the ante and making it more difficult. And then the bad guys, again, can assemble these agents, as I said, like in an orchestra, and press a button and it goes off and does it. So with the minimal human interaction, yes, it is scary. It is happening, trust me. However, AI is not just a tool for the attackers, it's also a tool for the defenders. And it's been used, certainly through continuous monitoring, triage. You get thousands, tens of thousands of alerts every day. No human can actually process all those alerts. So you may not be aware of this, but your organization is probably using AI to sift through all of those alerts, to find out the anomalies, to find out the ones that need attention, and to separate the chaff from the wheat, or reduce the noise. So what do we need to research? But you can also be proactive with AI and get AI to look at traffic on your network and say, are the bad guys in there already? Have you got communication during the evening at nighttime to servers in Hong Kong or St. Petersburg or wherever? AI can detect and is being used to detect these kind of anomalies, these hidden patterns. Certainly, if you do have incidents, and you will have incidents, AI is increasingly being used to make some automatic decisions, to speed the response, to stop the contamination, and to allow a faster fix. Certainly, if you've got a lot of systems, having the AI to help you prioritize and coordinate that recovery does speed things up. And finally, secure coding. We have practiced for years secure by design, and you can use AI to I suppose, confirm and check that you're coding securely. So, my next slide, I talk about deepfakes. You will have heard the phrase deepfakes. And when I saw my brother speaking Spanish and he doesn't speak Spanish, I realized how advanced the technology was. It was not only speaking Spanish, but it was with his voice, which was scary. But they are on the rise, and they're very convincing, and they're used, you might say, in high stakes fraud. Look, wherever money is involved, be aware and be very aware. I think AI, again, it's really down to AI that is augmenting or amplifying. I think AI stands for amplified impact, if you wish. They're cheaper, they're more accessible, and the bad guys are using them. So let's have a look. The types of fraud, and you will have seen this, fake biometric verification. So if you're using a video to prove, is this me, or am I an AI agent? I saw a presentation recently where the guy said it wasn't him. This is actually totally AI, and it was very convincing. So if it's no longer 100% pure, safe that you can use a video to verify somebody's identity, that's kind of scary. They're being used to impersonate people and to get people to make payments, fraudulent payments, of significant amounts of money because, hey, that's Jerry on the video. I'll do what he says. They're also being used more, what would you call it? Heinously, for bogus investment scams, fake celebrity videos. It looks like a celebrity that you would trust making a recommendation to do an investment. These are the kind of frauds you'll hear about. So what can you do about it? Well, maybe you've got to enhance your traditional checks, and one biometric check isn't enough. Facial recognition isn't enough. Maybe you need a fingerprint as well, or maybe a life likeness, or what AI can't do perfectly is to fully mimic a living, breathing body. And there are now tools that will help you detect if it's AI. So multimodal, having multiple ways of verifying, And multi-factor, well, authentication is one thing, but you don't know who's pressing the button. Whereas multimodal verification, you know, that facial recognition, the fingerprint, maybe having multiple. Fiona said it already, awareness training, awareness training, awareness training. The human is the weakest link. And you know, it can be as simple as if you're making a significant payment and you think this is strange, make a call back. You know, the old-fashioned method, pick up the phone. My final slide is on operational resilience, because I think if we want to use AI to our benefit, I think you can use it to improve your operational resilience. And in any case, operational resilience is no longer just a regulatory kind of tick box thing to say you have to have resilience and business continuity. I think it is a competitive differentiator. Those organizations that can bounce back quickly from, you know, a severe storm, you know, fire, it doesn't always have to be a cyber attack. They will be favored, whether it's investment or whether it's business. But AI will be used to bring companies down, as we saw, and cause further service disruptions. So what can we do about it? Or, you know, what do we see happening? I'm trying to put my future vision hat on. I think you're going to see a convergence of all of those different disciplines: the cybersecurity, the crisis management, business continuity, Chris's third-party risk, all of that into one function. You know, call it resilience if you wish, but they will, I think, coalesce. Third parties will come under more scrutiny because, you know, your organization is now extended. It's not just inside your four walls. It's probably, if you've 3 or 33 key third-party providers, that's a large organization. That's a difficult one to manage. Infrastructure is becoming more complex. It used to be that all your key systems were in-house. We've hardly anything in-house. You know, it's in Microsoft, it's in AWS, and we're still a small organization. But in larger organizations, it's distributed and becoming more difficult to manage. AI can help with that. AI can help with it, with everything, as well as being a tool for the bad guys. It is a tool for the good guys. I have seen in the last 2 months 2 very geographically close organizations get seriously hit by a cyber attack. Now, if I can see 2 within a mile from where I'm sitting, I know there's a lot going on. And in one case, they didn't have an immutable backup. That's a backup that basically, you know, is clean, hasn't been infected. It can't be changed. Guys, you need to have backups, and you need to have them off-site and off-network. And finally, I think an underestimated and rated action you can do is scenario testing. Test your plans. Test your plans and think of scenarios where not everybody is available. You know, the cross-training you should have done so that more than one person can do the job. This is very rushed. I know we could probably do a whole webinar on some of these topics. I think, you know, maybe AI governance. I'll just say that before I finish. Something you should consider, because you're using it already, even if you don't have a governance in place or a framework. So thank you for listening, and happy Christmas to you.
Thanks so much for that, Jerry. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Give me 1 second. I'm going to have a quick nosy. Okay. Right. Okay. So, someone's just raised their hand. Bear with me 1 second. Participants. Some very polite person has just raised their hand. If you could, the person who's raised their hand, would you mind writing your question in the chat box for me, please?
Okay.
Right. Vicky, there is a question in the Q&A there about the DAC, and we will send those links in the slide deck when we send this out. But the source that I used for that, if anybody's interested, is a company in the US. It's in West Texas, called 1 Point, P-O-I-N-T 5. So 1 and 5 are numbers. DAC. Have a look at that. It's an operational plant, and it's a very good explainer of how the process of both the DAC, the direct air recovery, direct air capture, and the sequestration works. But we will put that in the slide deck when we send it out.
Okay, bear with me. More questions are coming in. Okay, Is there an expectation that the EU-UK data protection adequacy decision will be extended before the expiry of the current decision in place? I'm assuming that is to Fiona.
So in the opinion, as I said, of the European Data Protection Board, it should be extended. I would imagine we'll be waiting until at least the week of the expiry date before we know. But yeah, we'll let you know if we hear anything in the meantime.
Okay. And I think Jerry wants to answer a question as well. It says, Jerry, you typing out an answer to something?
No, I thought I was clearing the Q&A.
Oh no. Just a few thank yous. I had a question to Fiona, actually. You said that there'd be one point of data collection between GDPR and lots of different examples that you produced. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so I had that in my notes, but I there were so many points to make that I skipped over. So in Europe, particularly, there are so many calls on organizations to report incidents and breaches. GDPR being one, NIS2 being another, DORA, of course, being the most onerous. And so the proposal is that we will have one single point of reporting. That whether it's a data protection breach or whether it's a major ICT incident, that we go to the same portal and it may be a different form, but we use the same link each time, and okay. Just cuts down on
that makes sense.
Yeah. So
okay. Lots of happy Christmases coming in. Happy Christmas to everyone. Have a brilliant holiday time and New Year. I can't see any more questions coming in for now, but as always, drop us an email if you want to ask us anything, and we'll send out the slides and any useful links later on today or early tomorrow. Okay. Thanks so much for your time, guys. Have a brilliant holiday.